Marty.
Welcome to another exciting episode of the Collect and Destroy podcast. I'm your host, the Baxter of Puppets, and on this week's podcast, we sit down with my love, the styling, profiling, limousine riding, jet flying, cross stitching host of the Wrestling Public Radio podcast to discuss all things Beetlejuice. Crystal Schmidt, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
It's good to have you. As I mentioned, you are the host of a podcast of your own called the Wrestling Public Radio podcast. Care to tell us a little bit about your podcast, the topics you're covering, and the unique style of your podcast?
Sure. So I have been a wrestling fan my entire life, ever since I was a little kid. I grew up watching Attitude Era stuff, so I'm very familiar with that specific era as one of my favorites. But I'm trying to branch more into learning a little bit more in-depth things about stuff that happened before I was born, or stuff that kind of happened in the little period where maybe I wasn't watching so heavily. So this is something that I decided to come up with. Is Wrestling Public Radio is a chance for me to learn, as well as to extend that knowledge to my listeners, so that we can all learn the history of wrestling a little bit better, and also connect what was going on in the real world at the same time as those wrestling storylines were coming to life. As far as my content so far, I've done podcasts about Gangrel and the whole like vampire thing that he had going on. I did Booker T. He has a really interesting story. And I have also done Medusa from WCW. She is one of many women that I would like to spotlight as I go through my podcast. And as far as my style for my podcast, I am most familiar with wrestling podcasts being people who are doing either just like current events, like what's currently going on in storylines through wrestling. And that's something that I wasn't really interested in having a hand in. And on top of that, I feel like oftentimes people who are doing wrestling podcasts, they seem like they're cutting their own promos, or they're like auditioning for their own, like, to be a commentator for wrestling. So it's a lot of like really like enthusiastic and loud and aggressive kind of speech going on. Whereas I'm a person who's a little bit quieter. I wanted something for myself that would be a little bit more chill, of a podcast, something that you might be able to listen to before you go to sleep, or something that's going to help keep you relaxed as you're on your drive to work, so that you're not getting like too amped up. I know that can be it can be anxiety inducing, especially for somebody like myself. So I like having something that's chill to listen to, and that's not for everybody, but it is for a sect of people. So I wanted to be able to provide that for people. So I'm kind of in like an NPR style of podcasting, which if it works for them, I'm hoping that it works for wrestling too.
Yeah, I've listened to it. I've listened to a few episodes, and I've got to say it definitely has that like NPR vibe. It's probably the most relaxing podcast I've ever heard. As well as what I enjoy about it is it's educational in a short amount of time. So it's not like you don't have to spend a lot of time, but you can learn a lot of things. So I found that very enjoyable.
Well, thank you.
Related to pro wrestling, I know we're both big fans of AEW, All Elite Wrestling, which is the new big competitor to the WWE. It's on TNT every week. I know you've been out on the search for the new AEW action figures by Jazzwares. I want to touch on what makes those figures so cool and different, and just comment on toy hunting in general and how that's been going for you.
Yeah. With the AEW figures, they're obviously it's the first wave of them that they're doing for the company, which is a really big deal in and of itself. It makes them this first line, especially, is going to be something that is collectible. It's got high value as far as something that you're going to have as an investment for the future. It'll have high resale value, 40 years down the road if somebody wanted to like resell something for any reason. As far as toy hunting, this is the first thing that I've ever really toy hunted for before. And this is a little bit of a new platform for me to be on, is actually going out and kind of being competitive with people and trying to find them, which it is really competitive. I could not believe how angry people get about things not coming out on time or being in stores on the day that they said that they're going to be in stores, not being available for online purchase or selling out really fast. So it's been something that I've had to kind of like get clever with finding where things are in stock and whether it's going to be a good gamble for me to drive an hour to try to find something and just cross my fingers, hope that they're there. But luckily I have been able to find the 5 figures that came out in the first wave that were actually shipped to stores. It looks like Brandy wasn't included in that.
Yeah, I saw on Ringside Collectibles that the Brandy Rhodes figure that you're mentioning was actually
Mhm.
like their top seller this month. So it's cool to see. It's the only woman in the line. Um, but the figures are really cool. I myself have been out hunting for the Masters of the Universe Origins collection, which just came out by Mattel. So I definitely know how that goes and how it feels to how many Walmarts you have to visit. And I've not been into a Walmart this much since these toys have launched. Just trying to find stock. It's a really interesting time for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely in the same line as you is I never go to Walmart, but because it's a Walmart exclusive right now, at least, it's drawing people to their stores specifically, checking the inventory just to see if anything's popped in. And, you know, obviously, if you're going in there for a toy, like you might as well pick up the necessities that you need to get as well. Um, and then, sorry, just to touch on like what sets the AEW figures apart, because I didn't cover that. They're quite different from any WWE figures that have ever been made. In the chest area, it seems like it's a little bit. Like there's another point of articulation in there that allows for a really good like crunching of the abdomen. So it gives you more of an opportunity to do a little bit more with like setting up little scenes that you want to set up when you're doing your collecting. If you're somebody who unboxes them and sets up displays, uh, as well as like for stop motion people who like to create videos with their action figures, it's something that like it adds another level of the detail that you can go into. And I've heard really great things about people who are doing those kind of things with their action figures right now.
Yeah, Jazzwares is coming in hot. They also just released a big line of UFC figures as well, which are equally as hard to find. Do you have a favorite figure in the new AEW Series 1?
Yeah, I would say that Kenny Omega is probably my favorite, just because he's Kenny Omega. But in addition to that, the head sculpt that is on Matt Jackson specifically, as well as Cody Rhodes, they're just so impeccably done, that it's just unmistakable who those people are. Even if you saw them without the paint on them, you just saw the actual sculpt of the head. It's the likeness is so good.
So I know you're an avid baseball fan. I know you're a big Brewers fan, and baseball's in full swing right now. You have another pretty impressive collection. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I collect bobbleheads. I collect baseball memorabilia in general, but bobbleheads are the primary source of all of the collecting that I do for baseball. It's kind of what got me started on collecting baseball things. And bobbleheads, for the Milwaukee Brewers organization are typically an all fan giveaway. So there'll be like one Sunday a month, they'll do a game where they're giving away a bobblehead when you enter the stadium. So with every ticket purchased, you automatically get a bobblehead. So some of those are going to be players, some of them are going to be mascots, some of them are going to be front office people, and they could be players from now, they could be players from the past, they could be specifically themed for things. So like in the photo here, we've got some of the mascot ones, a couple of the Polish sausage ones. The one that is all the way to the left where you see the actual Polish sausage uniform that he usually uses, which is the red and blue stripes. He's holding a cross stitch, and that's for a specific night that the Brewers have every year, which is called Stitch and Pitch Night. So they have like a group of people, you buy tickets for a specific section, you get a free bobblehead, and you're encouraged to bring whatever arts and crafts you're working on. So a friend of mine had gone and she brought me that when she did that. And then my other favorite would be my Tony plush one, which is the Niger Morgan variant where he's holding the T for Tony Plush. It says Tony Plush on the bottom of it instead of like his actual name, Niger. And that's one of my favorite ones just because he was like one of my favorite players when he was with the Brewers, and I miss him sorely.
Very awesome. And it's a very impressive collection too.
Oh, thank you.
So let's get started. And Beetlejuice was released in 1988. It's a classic film of both young and old, still beloved to this day. I'll run through a brief synopsis just so that everything else we're going to talk about. This will just prevent us from rehashing too much down the line. But the story revolves around Barbara and Adam Maitland, played by Gina Davis and Alec Baldwin. They die in an innocent car accident, find themselves stuck haunted in their small town of in Connecticut, a little small country residence. After their car crash, the outrageous, I'd say even annoying Dietzes, Charles, Delia, the wife, and Charles' daughter from his first marriage, Lydia, played by Winona Ryder, they move into the house. The Maitlands attempt to scare them away, but are unsuccessful. So this leads them to attract a rambunctious spirit named Beetlejuice, who, against their Netherworld caseworkers' advice, they enlist to help rid their home of the Dietzes. Beetlejuice's help quickly becomes dangerous for both the Maitlands, Barbara and Adam, and their newly befriended Lydia. Antics ensue, and in the end, we jump in the line, and everyone lives happily ever after, except maybe Beetlejuice. So, with that being said, Crystal, what are your earliest memories of the film? When did you first see it? And get a little bit into your personal memories of it.
Sure. So when I was little, I guess I should preface this by saying that Beetlejuice came out the year that I was born. So I did not see it in theaters. I probably came across the animated series actually as a kid before even touching the movie. But I liked, like creepy little things, anything that was weird and whimsical. I was always looking, throughout the TV guide on TV, trying to find something that was just like, oh, this seems weird enough for me. So as far as the movie, I probably ended up just seeing it on cable TV as a kid. I'm sure that my dad or my siblings threw it on at some point, and we started watching it, and Michael Keaton can automatically draw anybody in with a performance like he had in this movie. He cracks me up.
Yeah, I don't remember the first time I saw it either. I don't think I saw it in the theater, but I do remember my family watching it like many times throughout the years. So I think we had it on VHS. I'm assuming it might have even been, my grandma might have taped it off a cable and given it to us, like so many movies that we had in our collection. We just had VHS tapes with different movies written on them. You could fit however many, 4 movies,
several,
the extended play or whatever. So, I mean, I remember small parts of the movie being scary, but I also remember Michael Keaton's character kind of like offsetting that with just like how wacky and wild he was. Just such an off the wall, nonstop humor character. Um, and like little things that I remember. I remember like Beetlejuice coaxing the fly to come to the grave so that he can grab them and eat them, and then obviously the music in it, the song Deo, and the miniature town stuff with the rubber grass and the cardboard underneath it. Um, just like a lot of iconic moments, I guess.
Yeah, I remember definitely being scared of the sandworms. Like anytime the sandworm scenes would happen, I think it was the fact that they were creepy, but also combined with this, the music would get so loud and intense during those scenes that it freaked me out. I would definitely agree with you on that part. So it was nice that like despite that being quite frightening as a child, you would have the balance to it where you'd have the lighthearted music, you would have the lighthearted jokes that were going on, the funny voice from Michael Keaton to help offset the stuff that was a little bit scary.
That sound, ladies and gentlemen, means it's time for the ranking. Today, Crystal and I will be ranking our top 5 favorite Beetlejuice moments. These are our favorite moments of the ghost with the most, Beetlejuice himself. So I'll run through my list, 5 through 1, followed by yours, Crystal, and then the debate and discussions shall commence. So at number 5, I have Beetle plus Juice charades. Number 4, I have Spiky Beetlejuice. Number 3, the It's Showtime / Carnival Beetlejuice. Number 2, the Can I Be Scary Beetlejuice. And number 1, his grave popping entrance to Barbara and Adam. Now on your list, Crystal, you started out number 5, the Snake Scare Beetlejuice. Number 4, the It's Showtime / Carnival Beetlejuice. Number 3, grave popping entrance, again when he first meets Adam and Barbara. Number 2, the obituary job search at the beginning of the movie. And your number 1 was the Spiky Beetlejuice. So do you want to start with we'll go through our number 1s. You want to talk about Spiky Beetlejuice?
Sure. Spiky Beetlejuice was so hysterical to me. I could watch that specific scene in just like a small clip and laugh every single time for the rest of my life. Like there will never be a time when that scene is not funny. The fact that it's Beetlejuice has the spikes and he does that because he's tiny and he wants to hurt Barbara who's holding him. It starts with that, and then you have him like laying on the floor with these spikes all over him, and now he's regular size because he's in the tiny town and we're in the tiny town with him seeing this. And he like looks around and he's like looking for something to do, and that's when he sees this building that's Dante's Inferno room, which is like a gentleman's club. And the music that happens during that, and the fact that no there's no way that Adam made that little building in the tiny town. Like it just came out of nowhere. We're not sure who did it at that point. Is just really funny of like, how did this get here? And why is he able to just like, did he do this with his mind or something? It raises a question. So for me, the hilarity of that, his dance that he does and the music that's going on.
Yep.
I don't know what else to say. It's my favorite scene in the entire film. Like it's not even just a favorite Beetlejuice moment, it's my favorite scene in the entire film.
In the entire world.
In the world, yeah.
Yeah, I obviously love that scene as well. It came in a little lower for me at number 4. For me, it was the grave popping entrance. So we kind of saw Beetlejuice 2 times before this. One, you only see his hands. He's paging through the obituaries looking for work. And then you see him again when he's doing his little Western car commercial sales pitch. I know that that car pitch was based off of an actual guy that used to do a similar pitch. But the grave popping entrance to me is that moment for me, because he pops out of the grave, he's flying around, he flies out after them, and while he's doing that, then he goes into his qualifications. You know, he's going to tell them about how he went to Juilliard. I think I've got notes on this. Um,
Oh yeah, he's like, I attended Juilliard. I uh, attended business school at Harvard, and
Yeah,
then
I traveled extensively. I lived through the Black Plague. He talks about how many times he's seen The Exorcist.
yeah, and
And,
he like
and
progressively like loses his mind as he's
yeah, he's
doing it.
getting louder and louder as he's doing it. And just that introduction, like what a great character that was created by Michael Keaton, just to see that that character created. And again, like we were introduced to him to a little bit before we saw him, but this was like the hi, nice to meet you, I'm Beetlejuice.
Right. And for me, watching that now, like that specific scene, I see how there were kids that I grew up with who had to have seen that and taken lessons from how he like amplified himself throughout his list of qualifications, where he started out like kind of chill, and then all of a sudden he's like waving his arms all over the place, and he's yelling, he's at the top volume, and he's really aggressive. And I just think to myself, like, there were kids that were like doing that, so clearly we were learning things and we didn't like we didn't assess that at the time, where it was like, hey, you took that from Beetlejuice.
All right. So at number two, you have the obituary job search, which I just referenced, which is the first time that the character appears on screen, sort of. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for me, the obituary job search is important because it's the first time that we're exposed to Beetlejuice. You can't see him. All you see is like his hands in that scene, and he's holding a newspaper. He like makes a reference to uh, sandworms being up 5% that month or something like that. And he's like, oh, how dare they? And then he's like, I better start looking for a job. Just like a normal guy would, you're talking about stocks, then you're like, I got to do a job search. But instead of going to classified section, he ends up in the obituaries, which is
Of course he
hysterical
does.
because he's a dead guy. And the fact that the Maitlands are pictured there, they're in the clothes that they died in for some reason. And it's like, welcome newcomers, the Maitlands. So like it's some kind of weird paranormal newspaper that he's very clearly reading. And he like scoffs at it. He's like, oh, this is a good looking couple. They look stupid too.
Yep, an opportunity to prey on them. My number
Yeah.
two was the "Can I Be Scary" Beetlejuice, which is like at the tail end of the grave popping entrance, and it's a very short scene, but it to me like it's one of the things. Maybe if it wasn't so short, it would be number one, but like it stands out in my head so much because it's like Adam asks, "Can you be scary?" and he's like, "Can I be scary?" and then he does the little, "What do you think of this?" and you see something come out of his face as he scares him, and it's supposed to be the most terrifying face ever, and he's like, "You like this? You like it?"
That's really
um
good.
yeah, I've been practicing my beta voice. But yeah, I mean, when they originally were going to do that, they were going to do special effects. They actually created some special effects to actually show it. But it's one of those cases where by not showing it, it's much more terrifying than if you actually saw it, just based on Adam and Barbara's reaction.
Yeah, it was like too hot for TV.
So number three, you have the grave popping entrance. Anything you want to add to what I was saying about that?
No, not particularly. Just the fact that he like pops out of there and um he like goes flying through the air, that's cut and dry. I feel like that is one of the best parts of that scene. And like we had talked about him listing his qualifications.
So at number three, I have the "It's Showtime" Carnival Beetlejuice, which is where he comes to take care of the guests at the house. With the carousel like head and his arms inflating giant hammers. Everybody's amused. They think this is like so cool until his arms inflate and he Robert Goulet's character Maxie Dean and his wife are essentially slammed out of the room through the ceiling, like one of those strength tests at a carnival or an amusement park. And then Otho too, he's trying to escape. Beetlejuice puts a spotlight on him and changes him to some hideous clothing that he cannot even handle. You had to add 4. Anything you want to say about that one?
For me, I think that the carnival look on Beetlejuice is the most memorable look that like has stuck with me since I was a little kid. It was probably the thing that drew me in the most as far as appearance wise for Beetlejuice. And the fact that on the little carousel that's on top of his head, I found it really interesting as I was like watching this movie several more times in preparation for this, that he's got like a little skull on the top center of the carousel, which looks a lot like Jack Skellington. Apparently it's something like that skull was something that why am I drawing a blank?
Tim Burton.
Yeah, Tim Burton was drawing since like the early 80s. Like it's just a little like, calling card that he had. It was something that he always drew. So I found it fascinating that not only did he put it in Beetlejuice, but eventually it did become a main character in one of his future films, Nightmare Before Christmas.
Yeah, from Beetlejuice on in Tim Burton's films, it seems that a lot of the visuals repeat themselves.
Mm-hmm.
You start seeing that style. Like it's kind of like the Nightmare Before Christmas style. So you look at that movie and then you start to notice it in things before that movie and things that come after that movie.
Right.
For my number 4 was Spiky Beetlejuice, which was your number 1. Just the way it starts with the little car crash in the tiny town. The line, "Go ahead, make my millennium." Classic. And then dancing over into Dante's Inferno. Just awesome stuff. Number 5, you had the snake scare Beetlejuice.
Yeah, for me, the snake scare Beetlejuice. So for those who would like a reference, it is when Delia is going up the stairs and she's got her hand on the railing of the stairs, and eventually it like transforms and you see like these scales instead of the actual railing that had been there. And it turns out that it's Beetlejuice as a snake who is there. But the specific part that I find most hilarious about this particular scene and why it made number 5 on my list was when Beetlejuice's head wraps around and he scares Charles Dietz and he's like, "We're here for your daughter, Chuck." And just the inflection that he uses is, I don't know, it cracks me up. It's another thing where it's like, if it cracks me up every time that I watch it, it's got to make the list as being something that's like one of my favorites.
Absolutely. And it's like, if you know it's coming, it's funny. And if you have forgotten it's there, you're instantly reminded of just how funny that is.
Right.
For number 5 for me is when Lydia meets Beetlejuice and needs his help. And he's trying to explain to her that she needs to say his name 3 times, but he can't say his name. So he's using charades upon his suggestion. You got to say my name 3 times. And how is he going to do that? He starts trying to get her to guess. All of a sudden there is a beetle behind her that waves and is like, "Hey, how you doing?" And then, so she's got the beetle part, and then to figure out the juice part, all of a sudden in the air, a Minute Maid juice carton from the 80s appears and pouring into a glass, and she's trying things like beetle orange, and then eventually she gets Beetlejuice out of it. You know what that sound means. It's time to head into the pit. In this segment, we pit 2 or more things against each other in the ultimate fight to the death. In this week's Into the Pit, we have the battle of the afterlife caseworkers as Juno, Miss Argentina and Roadkill Man clash to see who comes out victorious. Crystal, your thoughts?
So, my thoughts are that while Juno is probably the most helpful to the pair, she is like contractually obligated to be the most helpful. So, I don't think that she qualifies as somebody who's necessarily gone above and beyond for me. As a character, I feel like she does the job that she needs to do. Um, and I think that Miss Argentina has the attitude that anybody who's ever worked in customer service wants to have. And I do appreciate her for that as well. Um, but I am giving the winner to poor Mr. Roadkill Man, who gets no actual name. I feel like he's been slighted. He in the credits he's referred to as just messenger. But he, of all the civil servants, he tells the funniest joke when he's asking the Maitlands, "Oh, how do you think I look today?" And they're like, "Oh, you look pretty good," even though he's roadkill. He's got like tire marks all over him. He is a pancake, basically. And that he responds being like, "Oh, because I'm feeling a little flat," and then he like cracks himself up as he gets like taken away from the Maitlands. So the fact that he has the best joke of all the civil servants who are there from tragic circumstances in the afterlife because they have taken their own lives and they are forced to be bureaucrats basically in the neither world. So that, and on top of it, I didn't find out until doing research for this, but poor Roadkill Man is played by the guy who is Old Man Withers from Wayne's World. When they like rip off Rob Lowe's face, and it's this old guy. And I had no idea that this was the same person. I wouldn't recognize him, even though you can like kind of see Roadkill Man's face. So that's where I'm at. That's how I feel. Roadkill Man deserves better, and I'm giving him better today.
All right. All right. Yeah. I mean, I got to look at all three of them as what they are. I mean, Juno is their caseworker. She's there to deal with assisting them, helping them deal with the afterlife. So she's like, comes out of the gate really strong and helpful. We find out that Beetlejuice was her assistant, which is pretty interesting. He decided to go out on his own as a bioexorcist. The receptionist, who is Miss Argentina, is actually her new assistant. So we got to figure out where that's headed. She gives them still talking about Juno. I mean, she gives them good advice. She says
She does her best. Yeah.
She warns them not to summon Beetlejuice, and to just scare the Dietzes out of the house on their own, saying that Beetlejuice doesn't work well with others. I think from like a special effects or maybe reality in this world that we're in, the smoke coming out of her throat is amazing, alluding to the fact that she slit her own throat to end her life, and that's how she ended up in this job. The negative is she's wise, but she's very quick tempered.
Yeah, I agree.
So
Yeah, the way that she like treats the football players.
Yeah, she's got the experience. What I find interesting too is the actress that played her, Sylvia Sidney. She's a legendary actress from the golden age of Hollywood. So it's kind of cool when you can pull from another time. She often played the gangsters' girlfriends and sisters in those movies. So it's kind of funny when you see her in this movie in the role that she's in, and then thinking about what character she used to be in. Moving on to Miss Argentina, also known as the receptionist. She also has a funny line, which is, "If I knew then what I know now, I wouldn't have had my little accident," which she shows her beautifully slit wrists. So I don't know if that means that she didn't win the Miss World competition and that's what led to that. We don't really get an answer, but there's some stipulation that people that end their lives early end up in positions as bureaucrats. Um, Negatives. She might be a sore loser.
Well, that's like a debatable thing because we don't know for sure
No,
that
no, we don't. But she could be. But we do. What we do know is that she doesn't seem like she cares too much about ones that are recently dead either. So the way that her customer service isn't the greatest.
correct. But the other people who are in the waiting area clearly do not care about the recently deceased either because they're all like, "Oh, you forgot your handbook? What the heck are you doing?" When the Maitlands admit that they didn't bring the handbook with them, like everybody's like rolling their eyes, scoffing at them. So like I feel like it's just that's the culture down there in the neither world. Well,
Um,
in the waiting area at least.
so lastly, I mean, we get to Roadkill Man, who's gotten run over, resembles a raccoon pancake here. Um, he's like some sort of like postal worker, I guess.
Yeah, it seems like he's kind of like the mailman. Like he like brings things back and forth for people who, you need paperwork. I'll bring it here. He brings the people back and forth from the waiting area to wherever they need to go. He kind of like gives them a little bit of guidance.
Like you said, he has a good sense of humor, making the joke about feeling a little flat.
Mhm.
He's got those big tire marks across him. So it alludes to, again, we don't know for certain, but it alludes to that he jumped in front of some sort of vehicle.
Yeah.
The negative is that he's kind of hung out to dry. Like he is flat as a pancake. And so he probably doesn't have much strength or agility. I'm just saying. But on a positive, he could probably get into some pretty tight spaces.
Well, I didn't realize that this was something where they were gonna have to like go through like a double dare challenge or
Well,
something.
there's the afterlife
Olympics. Oh,
feats of strength. They're feats of strength.
I did see. I didn't. I wasn't aware of that. You must have read some like fan fiction or something. You got lost
I'm
in that
gonna
Wikipedia.
I'm gonna go. I'm actually gonna go with Juno on this one because if they would have just listened to her, they probably wouldn't have gotten into all of the trouble that they did.
That's true. But if they hadn't listened to her, or if they had listened to her, we wouldn't really have a movie. So I give the Maitlands credit for that one. They gave us a great movie.
All right, so I'm going Juno. You're going Roadkill
I'm
Man.
still going Roadkill Man. Yeah, I really appreciate him.
All right, before we get any further into this, we should probably discuss a little bit about the origins of the film itself. The idea for Beetlejuice began in the mid 1980s when author Michael McDowell, not to be confused with Michael McDonald, wanted to try it in the movie business. He was inspired by Ghostbusters and Poltergeist and wanted to write his own supernatural script. So he was joined by the writer Lawrence Senelik, and while they were at their home, they're trying to brainstorm. They became increasingly annoyed with their own families, which is kind of hilarious when you hear that annoyance with their families actually inspired this movie and things like the Dietzes. But originally, the script was a lot less comedic and much darker, right?
Yeah, when they wrote the first draft of this script, it was originally going to be strictly horror film. It was going to be like deep horror. Everything was going to be super dark and creepy. And like the Maitland's death, Adam and Barbara, they were going to get into an accident and die. However, it was going to be much gorier, much more gory is probably what I'm looking for. Is going to be a little bit darker from that regard. Whereas, what we end up with something that is quite unoffensive overall. It's kind of a little bit light because, there's like the dog that they just avoided hitting and saved its life. And it ends up being the reason that they die. So there was like a transition between what was initially supposed to be and what ended up being in the movie. And then Beetlejuice was actually supposed to be like a winged demon, and he would take the human form of a Middle Eastern man who was actually a murderer, and he was going to uh, try to kill the Dietzes. That was like his plan the whole time as a demon. And worst of all, it included a scene that included Beetlejuice sexually assaulting Lydia, who is very much like, I haven't read that first script, but she's very much a child in the movie that we end up seeing. So it's a little bit alarming that like that's where they decided that they were going to go with the initial draft of that. And I'm really glad that it ended up getting tossed out and rewritten several times in order to lighten it up a little bit and give us something that is not quite so creepy.
Yeah, definitely. I know that Universal was none too thrilled with the first version, which led to them bringing in Warren Scarron, who had worked on Fire with Fire. He worked on Beverly Hills Cop 2. And then after Beetlejuice, he was involved with Batman in 1989. So there's probably some overlap between the two movies, working on both of them. And it drastically changed the tone of the film, as you had said. And focused a lot more on that afterlife bureaucracy, the complexity of that. Tim Burton obviously had a lot of success with Pee-wee's Big Adventure coming out in 1985, and studios started seeing him as like a viable director, like that could make their studios money. And he had expressed his love for all things scary, bizarre, and putrid. And so when Beetlejuice comes along, it seems like a no-brainer that he would get involved. He took it on when he was in the early stages of Batman, and he kind of gravitated towards the script again because of what he thought he could do with it.
And clearly it worked because it ended up being one of the top 10 highest grossing films in 1988, which is no easy feat.
Well, and when you think about it, like that kind of started Tim Burton's whole creepy career,
For
because
sure.
Pee-wee's Big Adventure, which to me is his best film. That's just my opinion. Pee-wee's Big Adventure was like kind of dark, like it had its dark elements, but it wasn't goth at all. It wasn't like spooky in any way. So then they bring in Michael Keaton, who's going to end up being Batman here. And this is a perfect casting, and Michael Keaton himself has said this is his favorite role of his career.
Yeah, Michael Keaton for me made this movie rewatchable. Like there are some times where you like watch a movie and you're like, you know, it was good. I'll watch it maybe a couple times in my youth and maybe into my adulthood. But Michael Keaton's acting skills in this were presented in the best possible way. I was reading up on like how they presented this character to him, and they told him just think of Beetlejuice as somebody who exists in all periods of time. So he really did a great job at pulling different like pop culture kind of things. So you have like he does the yeehaw kind of thing when he's doing like his little commercial. He does the like mobster style voice when he's like, "Hey, what's the matter? Where are you going?" kind of thing. He's so all over the place that it works perfectly. And when you go back to thinking, oh, well, they told him that he exists in all periods of time, he really stole from all periods of time to make this guy who's just wacky.
Well, just imagine this. Originally, Tim Burton wanted Arnold Schwarzenegger in this role. And the only reason it didn't happen was because at the time Arnold was like the biggest action star on the planet. So I don't know if the studio was like, "Yo, Tim Burton, we can't do that," or if Arnold, like his people, were like, "This isn't going to work out." But again, Michael Keaton coming in, he ad libs 90% of his lines in the movie, which is just bizarre and amazing when you see how great the movie turned out. And it's not bizarre for like a comedian, but like Michael Keaton wasn't a comedian. He wasn't somebody with this like wide base of that kind of style prior. But even stuff from like the shock hairdo to the mold makeup on his neck and face and the large teeth and everything, that was all a Michael Keaton creation.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It really his Beetlejuice character alone would put him in the running for like one of the greatest actors of all time, I would argue.
Oh, one more thing, and so before we switch topics,
Mhm.
another thing as an influence for Michael Keaton in this role was Bill Moseley, who played Chop Top in Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, the Tobe Hooper film. He used that character as a big jumping off place. He kind of wanted to imitate that kind of a character. For those of you who aren't familiar with that character, Bill Moseley, he was also played Otis in the Devil's Rejects trilogy by Rob Zombie. Um, Another just like incredible actor who's done a bunch of really cool roles that were very transformative. But to hear that that was some inspiration for Beetlejuice, it makes so much sense when you go back and you look at him. Until recently, I had never really heard that he had used that as an influence.
Yeah, I would say that it's kind of like when you're making a comedy of something, if you take somebody's personality and you like tweak it just ever so slightly, you end up with something entirely different and useful in a different way than it was initially used. I feel like Michael Keaton definitely, you can feel the vibe of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, like erratic behavior, uh, and then it's mixed in with like his little humor bits. It comes together really nicely. Beetlejuice is fantastic.
So the Maitlands and Beetlejuice have a bunch of incredible scares throughout the film due to the amazing special effects. What's so amazing to me is like the effects seem very creative and like really unique. But the budget for the special effects was only $1 million. So for something like a big Hollywood movie like this, that's a very small budget. But what we got from that, I wouldn't want anything else. And like nowadays, they're trying to cut budgets by using some hokey CGI. But the practical effects that they use in this movie are astounding.
Yeah, so the first time that we see the Maitlands really try to make an effort to haunt the Dietzes and scare them out of their house is there's a couple instances where they try these like ultra creepy kind of things that would scare anybody if you could see the ghosts. Like Barbara she's hung herself in the closet. She rips her face off. Her eyes are dangling out of her head. And Delia and Otho are standing there in the closet and completely disregard her because they are unable or unwilling to see a ghost, essentially. Not everyone can see ghosts or will see ghosts. So they kind of just ignore her. They brush everything, including her, out of the way in the closet to then look at what's going on with the space there. Um, you also have Barbara is standing in the study with a bloody knife. She's got Adam's severed head in her hands, and his headless body is laid out on the floor. And Delia and Otho again do not see what's blatantly in front of them that we can see as the audience. But the effects that they used in that was like very practical. As far as Adam Maitland's severed head there, it actually, when they do the close up of Adam's face, it's actually Alec Baldwin with a black like card that's got a cutout below his chin so that it looks like he's not there at all. Um, and if you look up the scene, you'll see that there's like the practical severed head, but then it cuts into a close up shot of it's actually him, and that's quite amusing.
Absolutely. And our friend Nate had talked about that with the Indiana Jones movies, that like when they would use like uh, green screen or blue screen, that you would get like a fuzzy edge and you could tell it was fake and stuff. And the reason that those movies were so successful as well is that with special effects, when you use those practical effects, even if they're cheap and down and dirty like a cut card, it looks real. And that's the important illusion about that. Another one of my favorite special effects in the movie is the door to the Netherworld that Adam draws in chalk on the brick wall, and when it just seems so believable then that brick opens up and there's green glowing light pouring in on them. I just thought that was a really nice touch to show that transition to getting over to the other side, if you will.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I enjoyed that, like, they're, like, reading instructions on how to do that also, like, at the same time, so there's, like, layers to, like, "Oh, you have to do this, and then you have to do this," and then you see that it actually does work. The fact that they were able to make that come together and have it look so real as they were doing it, is brilliantly done.
Tim Burton wanted to make the special effects as tacky and B movie as possible due to that small budget. But again, I think the irony there is that by trying to do that, it actually made it more successful and real to me, especially as like a kid watching this. I like you said with the sandworms, like it was terrifying. It's just stop animation, but the juxtaposition of like the real world to the scenes on Saturn with these terrifying sandworms with the big teeth, and like again, this is kind of that signature Tim Burton look. Like you see these kind of creatures showing up in again Nightmare Before Christmas and other Tim Burton films.
For sure. And the use of the stop animation that they did, like in post production, is really really cool. With not only the sandworms, but they also did like the sculptures that Delia made when they have like the wedding scene at the end of the movie. They come to life, and you see these sculptures like attacking the family. So the fact that they incorporated stop motion, like claymation style stuff, is very cool. And it also is very signature style for Tim Burton. He's used that quite a bit, that kind of style, and just like the way that things move a little, it makes it a little bit creepy. So the next one that's one of my favorites is, as far as special effects go, was the masks that were made for Barbara and Adam Maitland when they finally are convincing Juno that they've got this figured out. They know how they're going to scare the Dietzes out of their house. They're sitting in the office with Juno. She's like, "Show me what you got." And Adam goes and he like stretches his face. He pulls out his eyes into his hands, and he like somehow multiplies his eyeballs. He puts 10 eyeballs on his fingers and thumbs, and he's like waving them around. It's like super creepy. He kind of looks like Go-Go Dodo, or from Tiny Toon Adventures. That's like a 90s kid thing, I think. But
I'll
like,
go back even further. It's like Spy versus Spy, like
no, you're 100% correct. Yeah.
going way back.
Yes. Which it's possible that the dodo was also inspired by Spy versus Spy. And you have Barbara, who goes a step further. She actually like opens up her mouth so it's gaping. She's got this really long tongue. She's somehow multiplied her teeth, and she flicks in her eyeballs so that they pop into the back of her throat. So they're like sitting at the top of her tongue when she's talking to Adam about like, "Oh, I don't know if I actually want to do this. I don't want to scare that sweet girl." Her tongue is moving as she's talking. So I could not even tell you exactly how that happened. I am no movie magician or anything. But I can say that it's really impressive to see just that like little extra mile. Like you said, they didn't have a lot of budget to work with, but they were really putting extra effort forth to make it seem like it was more realistic, and make it more creepy.
Another effect that you had on your top, it was actually part of your top five Beetlejuice moments, was the snake scare Beetlejuice. What I found cool about that was that I read that they had already figured out the special effects with that before Michael Keaton signed on to the movie. So then they went back before they executed it all and they made the face look more like the Michael Keaton Beetlejuice character.
Yeah, and that was so that you wouldn't have the audience kind of in this position where they're like, well, was that just like some random monster? Or was this Beetlejuice that was doing this? Or was it actually Beetlejuice who was being the snake? So rather than let people speculate, they decided to go in and switch things around and put Michael Keaton's Beetlejuice style head on it, which I commend them for doing so because it does lead to Delia making a sculpture of that head at the end of the film that scares Charles out of his chair.
The aging of Barbara and Adam during Otho's accidental exorcism was another thing that was probably the scariest part of the movie when I was a kid because the look of them aging was like it seems so real. Her toes curling up and like what I found really interesting is like as a kid, it almost seems like they planned that out. Like they were trying to maliciously attack Adam and Barbara. But then later you realize that Otho was trying to hold a séance and he accidentally commits a exorcism. Um, Terrifying.
Yeah, there's definitely stuff in that in the film that went way over my head when I was a child watching it, including the fact that like Adam and Barbara actually stop in front of a door at the Netherworld offices that they're at when they're going to see Juno, and they're like, "What's going on in there?" And the janitor that's working there is like, "Oh, those are the exorcised souls." And it looks just like what we see at the end of the movie. And like for me as a little kid, I'm not thinking about like what happened earlier. Like I when you're a little kid, you're not doing the foreshadowing thing, but then when you become aware of that stuff as an adult and you're rewatching this film, you start to connect dots and you're like, oh my god, Otho was exercising these people. And obviously when you're a little kid, you don't know the difference between a seance and an exorcism unless you were raised that way, which i I had no knowledge of like the concept that the two were any different or anything. So when they're talking about like holding a seance for them, I assumed that like Otho knew what he was doing and like this was all working out perfectly according to his plan. um and it's also very interesting to me that I was scared that these dead people were gonna die again. Like, when you think about it that way, you're like, well, they're already dead. So, like, can it get more tragic? And you're like, it definitely is more tragic. This is really sad.
Yeah, they even say that they're like you're killing them, and they're like they're already dead. You know.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of amazing effects in this movie and the costuming that goes along with those effects. But there's also phenomenal costumes and makeup just in general, like the outfits and the way that they had styled these characters. The costume designer Aggie Garrard, um, just like little things like Delia's hair, her makeup, her wardrobe, Lydia's funeral garb. Um, Her veil, all the black, the goth look.
Yeah, Lydia is a goth icon, at which I would say that she's a goth icon before goth stuff really hit the mainstream, um, as far as like for young people, so to speak. Obviously, like you had goth bands kind of hanging around back in the 80s, but I feel like as far as like somebody who is youthful being the goth girl, Lydia Dietz was one of the first to do it. The red wedding dress that offsets her wearing black the entire film is so cool. And also, it has a very powerful meaning, because back in the Victorian era, they had like little sayings for like, oh, you wear this, and this is how your marriage is going to be. And the saying with if you wear red was, you'll wish you were dead. Which I discovered that while doing research for this podcast. So it's like one of those things where it's like, wow, she like really like she was in a terrible situation. They put her in red because she was in a terrible situation.
Yeah, and then you've got Beetlejuice, the opposite of her, in that burgundy tux with the
which
frills.
which again shows that like Beetlejuice was timeless.
Yeah,
He didn't exist in any period of time. He wore stuff from all eras.
they just did a great job of making each character, the way they styled them. They were very distinctively their own character. Like Otho, his hair, he makes him look like a cartoon. Like he's such an identifiable character when you see him in the way that he carries himself as he's walking throughout the house. So Beetlejuice takes place in the fictional Winter River, Connecticut. Uh, Again, fictional. We live here. We live in Rhode Island, not far from Connecticut. But the scenes for the exterior scenes were all shot in East Corinth, Vermont, and the interiors were filmed in the Culver City studios in Culver City, California. Um, I just love the how the scene is set when you start the movie and they're flying overhead this nice New England. You see all the trees and everything, and then there's a seamless transition to the sky view of the tiny town, the miniature model town that was built by Adam Maitland.
Yeah, the tiny town was super fantastic to me because it actually involved them creating two sets, two worlds. They have the real world that we exist in, that the Dietzes exist in, and that in itself is like they had to do a lot of like finding locations for that that worked perfectly for the film. But on top of it, they had to make a set that looked like a life size tiny town. So the stuff that they did in order to make that a reality, the details involved with it are so perfect to me. The fact that they have the plastic grass that you would buy from Michael's or Joanne or whatever your hobby store is,
But large
and
scale.
yeah, and you buy just like a map of it and you cut it out so that it goes with your around your little buildings that you're putting in there. And then when you have the scene where they have the Maitlands have to dig to find Beetlejuice's grave so that they meet him for the first time. They're digging through that plastic grass. They're digging through the cork layer that is supposed to represent dirt, and then there's like layers of cardboard under there that's like extra insulation and supposed earth. And I think it's so brilliantly done how they created that tiny town to actually look like it was made with just stuff that you bought from your hobby store and crafted together.
Another part that I liked was the odd looking and unconventional architecture of their house, which you first see in the tiny town, and then you see it again in the real world. So it was kind of interesting because again it's rural, and the Dietzes come in and they start making their adjustments to the house, but the house is already weird to start with. It's not like anything I've ever seen before.
Yeah, it's an abnormally large house, and like you said, the way that it's constructed, it looks very quirky. I would say it's not something that like you would see on a normal outing to go look for houses that are for sale. On top of that, the transition that the Dietz's house, once they have ownership of it, the difference that it makes when they start to transition from it looking like how the Maitlands are dressed to more Delia's style. It's specifically Delia's style. This is not going in any direction towards how Charles dresses or how Lydia dresses. It is all Delia at the end of the day, and she's getting what she wants for her house, which is this like ridiculous architecture style that quite frankly matches her sculptures in that I find it quite hideous.
So we have a listener question that just came in. The question is, Do you think Adam and Barbara's ghost wardrobe should have been dripping water since they died in a river?
I do think that it would make sense that they would be dripping water because they died in a river, and everybody else in that film who has died and is in the neither world has some sort of like there's a certain look to them depending on how they died. They are stuck in those circumstances in which they lost their life. I do know the answer is that they had considered doing this, but Tim Burton thought it would be too uncomfortable for Gina Davis and Alec Baldwin to have to be wet the entire film. So that's why they ended up not doing it. But I do think that it would have been a little bit more in line with what they did with everyone else. Although it doesn't you don't have to follow rules. There are people who have green skin. There are people who have red skin who are in the neither world. So there's stuff where it's like that doesn't really make that much sense, but it's kind of cool. It looks all right, so we're gonna go with it.
I mean, it kind of adds to the part of like not knowing what happened and like trying to figure it out after the fact. I will say that the thing that impressed me the most with this situation was how calm Adam and Barbara were when they realized they had died. They were just like so chill. Like they were like, "Oh, okay." I mean, Adam went as far as to like recreate their or like create their funeral in the tiny town because they couldn't make it. So, and but like if it was me, I'd be like freaking out. I'd be like, "Oh my God, like people are moving into my house. I got to do this, I got to do that." Um and they
Yeah,
would
you would be like getting the house ready for them.
they would
You'd
be
be like, I gotta go rearrange my toys to make sure that they're set for the Dietzes.
No, I'd be like Macaulay Culkin in Home Alone. I'd be setting ghost traps.
Oh, I like that. That's a great idea.
We got another listener question here. Why wasn't Johnny Depp in this movie? Crystal?
I don't know the answer to that. Was he busy or I actually don't even know if maybe he was considered for a role in this. Not that I think that there's any role that I believe he would be perfect for, since
Yeah, I
I
have
feel
a
like he's
doubt.
like a little bit young.
Yeah, I don't think that they had like started to forge a relationship yet. I mean, he was doing Nightmare on Elm Street and on an unknown actor at this point, I believe. Um, so I'm sure that this is a joke question, but the serious answer is probably that they just hadn't forged that relationship yet where Tim Burton wanted to jam Johnny Depp into every one of his freaking movies. So, we're probably better for it.
I think I see here in the credits that he actually played the dog that they nearly hit with their car. So you know, I can't call it.
So just as much as like the set and the costuming played a role in like setting up this movie. Equally important is really the music of this movie. We've got Danny Elfman's theme, that like pounding, goth sounding piano melody with the violins and the horns. And um, what are your thoughts on the music?
Danny Elfman and Tim Burton go together like peanut butter and jelly. For me, at least,
And
it's
Johnny Depp.
Johnny Depp could go either way. Uh, no offense if Johnny Depp's listening for any reason. I don't know. You've got quite the following for Collect and Destroy. But Danny Elfman is somebody that has mastered this idea of a horror like score being light and playful while maintaining that spookiness in a way that really makes things very palatable for more people. There's not going to be that many horror kind of scores that are going to draw in the number of people that ends up giving you top 10 largest grossing film of the year.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, as many people know, but maybe some people aren't aware. I mean, Elfman, he got his start as the singer-songwriter in the new wave band Oingo Boingo in the 80s. Um, so his involvement with Tim Burton when Tim Burton got together with Paul Rubens to put together Pee-wee's Big Adventure, they both were big fans of Oingo Boingo and Danny Elfman's work. So they said, "Hey, Danny, we'd love for you to score this new movie we're working on." At this time, though, Danny Elfman had no formal training, so he was apprehensive to take that on. But what ends up happening because of that is he goes on to score that movie. He scores Beetlejuice. He then explodes by scoring Tim Burton's Batman in 1989, and the rest is history. I mean, from that point on, now he's been a very influential musician who has been involved with so many films, especially obviously the Tim Burton movies. You can't have one without the other. But like the Batman theme is still to me the official Batman theme. You see that in the animated series and many other areas that it's been used.
Yeah, Danny Elfman, he really did a great job at um, creating his signature as an artist for doing musical scores. Is you have these like embellishments that he's created with his work, that when you watch a movie, you can pick it out right away. Like, I bet Danny Elfman did this. Or if you're like, anytime you hear a song, you don't even have to be watching the film. You could just hear a song and be like, that kind of sounds a little Danny Elfman-ish. If somebody was using Danny Elfman as an inspiration for their own music, I'd probably be able to pick it out and be like, they like Danny Elfman.
Equally important to Danny Elfman's score is the calypso music of Harry Belafonte used throughout the film. There were 4 songs featured: Man Smart, Woman Smarter, Sweetheart from Venezuela, Deo, which is the Banana Boat song, and Jump in the Line, Shake Sonora. The juxtaposition, I think, is like perfect to kind of like bring some balance to the scarier elements in the movie. To kind of like the Danny Elfman music itself has that like balance to it. So does this bringing in this calypso music into the movie.
Yeah, this felt very much like like kind of like a non sequitur of sorts, where you have something that like it doesn't really fit, but somehow it fits perfectly with everything else. Where it's one of those things that just it kind of pulls you back uh, from the seriousness of appreciating something for what it is. You have something that kind of just like pulls you back and is like, oh, but this has like real life elements as well, by throwing calypso music in there. On top of that, for me personally, it like gives me that reminder of being a kid and you've got somebody's parents who are just like these middle-aged folks who are very into like island life, and every time they go on vacation they're like, oh, let's go to the Caribbean kind of stuff. And they probably listen to Jimmy Buffett as well, but they play calypso all the time around the house. And it's very funny that somehow the Maitlands were these people who were listening to calypso music on the regular, because you hear it throughout the entire film when they're alive and just hanging around their house doing their little chores.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that originally the song there was a song by the Ink Spots that was going to be used for that dinner party scene. And if for those of you who don't know, the Ink Spots were a group that was kind of like the genre of music was kind of a precursor to the R&B movement. And it was actually Jeffrey Jones and Catherine O'Hara who suggested going with calypso music for that scene. So when Adam and Barbara have their small dinner party scare and Deo plays, that's just like an iconic moment, film moment for all the ages. And I think it kind of revived a lot of Harry Belafonte's music, because like that song would have probably just kind of gone away. But in 1988, it gets new life, and everyone thinks it's awesome. And like you said, these people that want to play this kind of music around their house themselves, like that, this is like the big hit that you could listen to again. Tim Burton actually was worried. He didn't think it was going to be a funny scene. He was worried about how the song would go over. And then it went over so well that it's like, again, there's so many moments in this movie that are iconic, and you'd be like, that's the moment. Well, this is one of those top moments of the entire film.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I know that Catherine O'Hara is the main focus of that specific scene because she's the one who they're throwing this voice so that she's the one who appears to be singing this Harry Belafonte song. But I really have to commend Jeffrey Jones for his performance during this scene. Just for like when he like rears up his hands in like the claw position, for that alone, like his face just does this like weird like contortion. And that coupled with the way that his hands are like clawed up in the air like that, it cracks me up. It's one of those things where it's something that like sticks with you forever. Just that motion that he makes, and that he appears so sincerely alarmed by what's going on to
Yeah.
him and around him.
The choreography is incredible. And I wonder how much of that was ad libbed or if it was like specifically choreographed. And the question would be, how many takes did that take to get that nail down that dance party? But really impressive stuff. And I would say, and as far as Harry Belafonte is concerned, there's a great documentary about his life and his activism called Sing Your Song. I saw this a number of years ago, just on a whim. Excellent movie. So I would highly recommend looking that up. It's called, again, Sing Your Song. Speaking of music and Beetlejuice, there happens to be a Beetlejuice the musical on Broadway, or it was most recently on Broadway. Before the pandemic hit, we actually had tickets to see it like 2 weeks before it closed. So, but unfortunately, everything was canceled.
So we are big Beetlejuice fans, but typically we don't get to Broadway much at all. Like, even though we've moved much closer to New York City, we only live like 3.5 hours from the city, but we have not made it a point to prioritize going to Broadway musicals. But we were watching the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade last year when Beetlejuice was coming to Broadway. They did a number from the musical with the cast, and it really was something where we were like, this would be a really cool thing just to check out, even if it's not something that we end up being fully invested in, like moving forward, where we're like, oh my gosh, every time that the Beetlejuice the musical, like it's still something cool that we can be like, we saw Beetlejuice the musical and it was on Broadway, which to get to Broadway in and of itself is no small task.
Yeah, I think when you're a fan of anything and you are hungry for more content, we kind of touched on this on the last podcast, the Indiana Jones one. When you're hungry for content, you're going to search it out in any way or form that you can. So this is another example of like, there's not a lot of Beetlejuice content out there. There's not a lot of things you can see. There's only one film and then a cartoon series. So the opportunity, I love Broadway. I love musicals whenever I can get the chance to go check them out. But they're even cooler when you can see them when they're attached to something that is close to your heart, like this musical. I should just give a little bit of a shout out to Eddie Perfect, who did the music and lyrics for the 2-act musical. It's very true to its source material. And the book was by Scott Brown and Anthony King. It truly does look like a lot of fun, and I can only imagine. The movie itself is so fun, and Would love to see some more. We have another listener question today. This one is coming in for Crystal. It says, which style would you rock first? Delia's one-armed glove or her curly double snake sideburns?
Hmm. So I would have to probably give this one to the curly double snake sideburns. I I love cool hairstyles. I feel like I have relatively boring hair most of the time. But if I could style my hair the way that Delia styles her hair throughout the movie, I feel like I would be a powerful sculptor, probably. That would be like, I feel like that would force me to be a better sculptor. Um, I will do one better though and say that over both of these options, I would rather wear the glove around my head like a headband, like the way Delia does in one of the scenes. I really find that fantastic and creative. So that's probably where I would actually go as far as Delia's style. Another option would be her taking Charles's sweater, his Christmas sweater that he's wearing, and she repurposes it as pants. And you can see her when she's like cooking in the kitchen. She goes to the fridge and she's got this like saggy crotch pants. So as far as her style, I probably would go with the sideburns as far as your options that you gave me, but I think she's got some even more excellent things up her little sleeve.
Yeah, the funny thing about the sweater is he's wearing it like a scene or two before that. So like I never really noticed that. It took a few viewings to catch that. Um, So, talking about more content when you only have one film, the year after this movie came out, we were graced with an amazing animated series just called Beetlejuice. And it ran for 4 seasons from 1989 to 1991 and essentially picks up right where the movie leaves off. Beetlejuice is more of a friend in this one to Lydia. Um, but in the opening sequences of the first show, you've got calypso music. They're singing Deo, and what a fun show!
It really is. I think that the way that they did this show creates a really good stepping stone for kids who may be drawn to supernatural things or who are like into creepy crawly kind of stuff. Like I had a lot of friends when we were kids who were super into like little bugs and stuff, and I feel like the way that they incorporated the bugs from the movie and made them kind of like cute little critters in the show is a good way of like bridging the gap between uh, content that is maybe not quite appropriate for kids. Like the movie might be a little bit too much for a certain age group. But the animated series, however, would be something that's quite friendly for children to be watching. I also think that a show like this does open up a great opportunity for parents to have a more lighthearted conversation with their children about death. It's not something that you see very often in cartoons or children's shows. Obviously, it's something that, like Sesame Street or Mr. Rogers, they do a really good job with like educating children and talking to them about like this is what happens when people pass away. Um, and this is like another one of those things where it's a little bit different than like the educational tools that we have in Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers, but it is another platform for parents to use to keep things a little bit lighthearted for kids while also teaching them something that might be a little bit scary, but there's a way that we can make it a little less scary.
Yeah, by showing them how fun it is to be dead.
Stop.
I will say that in the movie they do a good job of like putting a little disclaimer in there when Lydia is writing her suicide note that she doesn't want to be alive anymore. Adam and Barbara talk her out of it and explain like, no, this is not actually what you want to do, and it's not actually fun. which is probably good because otherwise there might have been a few lawsuits coming on the tail of the heels of that movie. The cartoon has a very 90s feel to it. It's very fun. It's almost like a Nickelodeon / MTV vibe too, from the time. What's cool about it, like all great cartoons, is that it's not only good for children, but it's also very funny for adults. So there's jokes that kind of go over the head of a child, but the child's going to crack up because it's silly and funny. The actor who plays Beetlejuice sounds just like the Michael Keaton Beetlejuice. In referencing the more adult focused jokes. I was watching an episode called Handyman, in which Beetlejuice meets up with a bunch of ghouls tools. And so in this case, the drill is a drill sergeant, the monkey wrench is a monkey, and the jackhammer is like this Jack Nicholson looking character, which again, as a child, they're going to be like, Jack Nicholson is who? But to us as adults, we latch on right away and see who this character is, the caricature of a jackhammer that looks like Jack Nicholson. Just nonstop jokes, puns galore.
Yeah, it's a great series overall. It is so great, in fact, that so there were several animated series that came from live action films kind of around this time period. And while many of them were certainly well done, this one was so well done that they actually won a Daytime Emmy for Outstanding Animated Program, which I feel like reflects our beliefs. Both of us feel pretty strongly that the artwork in this is so beautiful, and the way that they transition things that were creepy, like the sandworms in the movie, were quite scary for us as kids. You have the animated series ones, and they're like, oh, shades of purple. They've got green lips, and they've always got this expression where they're like kind of surprised all the time instead of being like super angry. Their teeth don't look quite as ferocious, but they're still like a little bit dangerous looking. But the expressions that the sandworms have are just so lighthearted and whimsical. And I would say that word whimsical really describes Beetlejuice in general, but specifically the animated series. They did a really good job at making it friendly.
So another area in the Beetlejuice franchise, and we kind of touch on this on all of our episodes related to wherever we can, the translation of from the movie to the toy lines that came out. So in 1989 to 1990, Kenner had issued action figures for all the key versions of Beetlejuice from the film, as well as other, peripheral characters that show up in the movie. These were 6-inch action figures, and vehicles and play sets, and really fun stuff, really creative, and all the characters kind of did things.
Yeah, I don't remember there being a Beetlejuice toy line. When I was a kid, we didn't have any like at our house or anything like that, which leads me to believe that my mom, because I have older siblings who usually I got hand-me-downs from, so there would have been one lingering around somewhere for me to get my hands on. But I feel like my mom must have thought like either he was too creepy for us to have toys of, or it was something that just wasn't interesting to my older siblings, so we never got our hands on any of the toys. So now we're making up for that in our adulthood.
Yeah, there's like a costume too, like where you could like put on a mask that looked like Beetlejuice. There's all sorts of different other really cool stuff put out by Kenner. They had the Phantom Flyer vehicle. They had the Vanishing Vault, which is actually a toy that you had bought me, a place that you had bought me for Christmas actually last year. The cool thing about this playset was that you put the full size action figure in, and you would close it, and then when you open it up, you would take out a tiny shrunken Beetlejuice figure. Just a really cool, creative way to play with the figures, and it kind of went along with the movie itself. Yeah, there's a tiny Beetlejuice right there. There were plans for a toy line based on the Beetlejuice animated series, but this toy line series only went to the prototype phase. Kenner canceled the plans. There was one toy that was confirmed, which was the Jacques Laline character, which was the bodybuilding skeleton from the cartoon. The funny thing about Jacques Laline is he didn't have any muscles, but he was a bodybuilder. And he was kind of based off of Jack LaLanne, the famous fitness guru. Um, just, just,
Really?
just cool stuff. So no animated series figures, but if you really want to get your fix for those, Burger King did put out a series of 6 figures that were double sided.
Those are really cool. I definitely would have wanted animated series ones when I was a little less. I think that that transitions so well to toys. And like obviously I was a little kid when this was airing, so I definitely would have asked for those if I had known, like if they had actually like made some that were in stores and like I went to the store and saw them or saw them in the JCPenney Christmas catalog or the Fleet Farm Christmas catalog. Like I would have been the person who was like circling that, like, give me these cool animated series ones. Um, so I am quite sad that there aren't ones that are those like fun colors like these ones are.
Yeah, definitely. I probably would have got them if they were sold by McDonald's because I was more of a McDonald's kid than a Burger King kid.
Happy Meal Kid. Okay.
Yeah, for sure. If you wanted something a little more advanced, a little more detailed, obviously you can always count on NECA. Uh, they had put out a 7-inch line of figures. That first series coming out all the way in 2001, so 19 years ago. And then Beetlejuice did resurface in their cult classics line in 2007. So I think we're due NECA. We're due Randy Falk for a new line of NECA Beetlejuice figures, maybe like an Ultimates line where they have multiple heads and hands, especially with the Beetlejuice character. There's so much you can do with accessories.
Yeah, the fact that NECA's doing the accessory packs now would leave a lot of options for not even just Beetlejuice, but like like the secondary and tertiary characters from the films. You have so many cool little accessories that are used throughout the film that would definitely transition well into a toy line, especially one as hyper detailed as NECA. They do phenomenal work.
Yeah, and their packaging only gets more advanced with every year they're doing something cooler. And it's harder and harder to take them out of those packages because of how beautiful the artwork is. And they're doing, kind of like they're doing Terminator 2, a new series of figures right now, and they're getting new original artwork on those packages. Just beautiful, beautiful stuff.
Yeah, the other thing with the toy line is the fact that because the ones that they've made are from so long ago, they've become more rare at this point. So like people who are buying on the secondary market right now, trying to collect it, all things Beetlejuice kind of stuff, for those of us who became collectors later in life or are younger. So collecting wasn't really an option when this stuff was being released. It prices people out of being able to get their hands on these Beetlejuice things. So I think that having another a return of Beetlejuice to the NECA line would be very, very cool if they can make it work and get the licensing to do those again.
Yeah, and it's twofold because on the detail figures, the technology only gets better and better. And
Right.
then again, the price comes down because there's more availability on it, on the figures that hit the store shelves. Um, Albeit it's hard to find them often in the stores when
Yeah.
they're so limited and exclusive. So, along with toys, there were 3 Beetlejuice video games that came out. In 1990, we saw The Adventures of Beetlejuice Skeletons in the Closet, which was an MS-DOS PC game. So this is a pretty old game. based on the animated cartoon series. And it was Beetlejuice. You played as Beetlejuice. You must battle various skeletons and other monsters by shooting loogie projectiles at them.
So what's funny about the loogie projectiles, like this would not have really made sense to me had I not watched the movie and also heard this information as like I was doing research for this podcast is like if I played this game, I wouldn't have been like, "Oh yeah, that's cuz he's like hawking loogies throughout the entire movie. Like he like spits in his jacket. He's like, yeah, I'm gonna save that guy for later. Like it's an actual part of his identity is the fact that he is like your little
He's
loogie
disgusting.
projectiles.
Yeah, he's disgusting.
Um, yeah, like so it is truly like a part of him that, and obviously you would want to put something like that in the game where it's not like he's just like shooting a gun or something like that. You have to come up with something that is absolutely mortifying, and loogie projectiles it is.
I want to take a brief moment to give a shout out to one of our listeners, Carlos. He mentioned when we were talking about Happy Meal toys, uh, just about the collectability of those. And he's got a bunch of the toys in the original packages. And that kind of stuff is just nostalgia galore, like thinking back on those kind of toys and toy lines. And like it's not the same as buying it at the store. You can buy a lot of things at the store, but the Happy Meal were like specific campaigns, and they used to be like a really high quality, like the kind of toys that you could get in a Happy Meal.
Yeah, I definitely feel like the pangs of nostalgia anytime that we go somewhere and they have the ones that are like in the plastic original packages. I'm always like, I just kind of want to like take a look through these a little bit, dig some, and see if I can find anything that really speaks to me. Because there are some that really like pull on my heartstrings, like the dinosaurs series ones. I really, really loved those as a little kid. And I can't tell you the amount of trouble that I put my mom through to get me those teeny beanies from McDonald's. We like when I tell you, we would go to McDonald's every Wednesday after school. With like my mom would pick us up from school along with the neighbor kid that we babysat, and we would all go to McDonald's. And when they had those teeny beanies, we were like asking like, hey, do you have actually this one? Could you throw that one, like the little elephant in there instead? Because I already have the platypus. We were sneaky, you know, it's an obsession. I guess that like maybe that's where my toy collecting started was Beanie Babies.
That's what I was going to say. It sounds like you haven't just got into toy hunting. It sounds like you've been toy hunting for a while.
I'm
Um,
glad we could have this therapy session where I figured out where it all started. I'd never
uh,
really I never really connected it. But that's it. It's the beanies.
I it probably breaks Carlos's heart to hear this, but I like buying the Happy Meal toys and stuff like that now. Like, I would love to be able to get this full set of these animated figures, but get them in the package, because when you get them in the package, it's like that same feeling of being 6 years old and peeling it open, and it still smells like the fresh plastic, even though they're like 30 years old. Um, you have less like decay and scratching and weird stuff that happens to them. But anytime I can buy like old toys and then actually open them, there's certain ones like the Beetlejuice figures I have here. If the packaging is in mint condition, I probably won't open them. But others, I'll open them up, to put them on display, and they're in pristine condition when you can have that. Um, so the second Beetlejuice game came out in 1991, and that was for the NES system, and it was developed by Rare, who would later go on to develop Donkey Kong Country for Super Nintendo, as well as Banjo Kazooie for N64.
I was definitely an N64 kid.
GoldenEye, that's where it was at for N64. Lots of
Uh,
hours spent playing GoldenEye with my
let's not
friends.
discredit Diddy Kong Racing.
Uh, what about Donkey Kong Returns? Donkey Kong Country Returns.
I don't want to play that. I'll go play
Minecart,
Spyro for the umpteenth time.
Minecart Nine Nightmares. Okay. Beetlejuice Horrific Hijinks from the Netherworld came out in 1992. And that was for Game Boy. And in this one, the player was taking control of Beetlejuice as he attempts to get rid of all the ghosts that he invited into Lydia Dietz's house. And the last thing to mention was there was an expansion pack for Lego Dimensions in 2017 that was Beetlejuice. So if you're like a Lego freak and you love the Lego Dimensions games, and you love Beetlejuice, again, you got to get your hands on that. So we have another listener question here. Do you wish, as much as I do, that they made Beetlejuice Goes Hawaiian? Well, the funny thing about that is that's actually our next topic to discuss, which is the sequel that never was. There was huge box office success off of the Beetlejuice film. And so a script was immediately commissioned to create an immediate sequel. Michael Keaton was on board. Winona Ryder was on board, both to reprise their roles. And Tim thought, with this Beetlejuice Goes Hawaiian idea, that it would be funny to match the surfing backdrop with German Expressionism because they're like totally wrong together. Do you want to touch a little bit on the plot of this film that we never got?
For sure. So the Beetlejuice Goes Hawaiian, the general premise was to be that the Dietz family decides they are going to build a hotel, and it happens that the hotel is being built on a sacred burial ground, and rightfully so, the spirits that occupy that land are none too pleased by the Dietz's colonization efforts of their sacred land. So we can only assume that Beetlejuice then has to come in to kind of play in between both parties as the ghost with the most to likely muck everything up rather than helping in any resourceful manner.
Yeah, I think that so following they're working on the script, Tim Burton actually ends up losing interest. Tim Burton loses interest, goes on to film Batman in 1990 and Batman Returns in 1992, and then his career just is like off to the races. He's doing all sorts of things, a lot of success. And then as of 2015, Warner Brothers was actually still trying to make this original concept as a movie, which is astounding to me because it sounds ridiculous.
Yeah, it does sound ridiculous, but I probably would watch it just on principle alone, like whether it was made back then or if it were made tomorrow, I would, just be like, you know what, I'm committed. I watched the first one. I really enjoyed the first one. I have faith in a second one. So yes, Brian, I do agree that I would like to see that made. I would like to see where they go with it. Um, I know that Baxter, you had talked about like Tim Burton going and doing the Batman films after this, and it just like brought this memory into my brain out of nowhere of so do you feel like that spiky Beetlejuice dance that he does is in any way similar to Jack Nicholson doing his like little dancing that he does throughout the Batman movie?
I could see that. I could see
Because I
that correlation.
kind of feel like I am associating the two right now, and it just came out of nowhere as soon as you said that he like went on to do the Batman stuff.
Yeah, I
So
mean, what I want to
I'm gonna
know is
throw it
why
out.
wasn't Johnny Depp in Batman? I
Yeah,
actually would have rather seen Johnny Depp at that point be the Joker than Jack Nicholson, but Jack Nicholson can play the Jackhammer in the animated series.
hard
We'll
disagree.
leave it at that. I think as long as Michael Keaton and Winona Ryder are involved with the new film, and hopefully Tim Burton, I think it would be definitely something to see. It seems like every couple of years they're saying that they want to do it and they're committed to it. As recent as April 2019, Warner Brothers actually had said that the movie's shelved. I think it's shelved until it's not. I think it's shelved until Tim Burton decides he's going to do it, wants to do it. I think Michael Keaton's still at peak acting, and he could jump into that role, especially with makeup. Like, he has aged, but his ability to act out that character, very similar to Death in the new Bill and Ted film. Even though the actor has aged, the character has not. It still works and still makes sense because it's a character in makeup. Um, what I would think is that in modern days, if Beetlejuice had come out in 2019, they're going to give it an immediate sequel with the way that the climate is with making films nowadays. They're going to throw a bunch of movie money at it. They're going to write the script right away, and they're going to get it made right away. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, filmmaking wasn't like that. Sequels often were not as they didn't have the level of quality as the originals had. People were reluctant to put money into it. They weren't able to sign actors right away. But nowadays, I think you would get an immediate sequel, and there's many plot opportunities. With Beetlejuice, you can call on him. If you really need him, you can call on him. You say his name 3 times, he's there. In the first movie, he's like kind of a troublemaker, but you can kind of make him a little bit more of an ally. I think he's kind of like Loki in the Avengers. You can call on him. He can be helpful, but you also know what you're getting. You know that this is a mischievous character, so he could end up like double crossing you, but at least you know that he will get you out of a bind, and he is a powerful asset. So I think you could just keep using that to be able to do multiple Beetlejuice movies. I'd be happy if we just get one. But if we never get one, we have a perfect film here. So
It's true. Yeah, I agree. I would like to know more about what happened to Beetlejuice in the waiting room. Like,
that's
his
true.
head got shrunk. He was supposed to go to a GQ shoot in like an hour and a half. He really didn't have the time to wait. But then all of a sudden, his head's a different size. Maybe that's not going to go so well for his modeling career. And how does he hook back up with the Dietzes?
Yeah, that brings up a great point, and I think the perfect transition to a new film would be them calling that number that was on his original slip, like as if it took this many years to actually call that number. Um, as he suffered through eternity, you could set it up with those same characters in that waiting room, the same receptionist, just have that just like that, and then transition into that. It's time for our final segment of the podcast, The Firing Squad. In this segment, I will be asking our guests 10 quick-fire questions. Crystal hasn't seen this list of questions prior to me asking them, so her answers should be quick and simple with no explanation needed. I know you've seen this before on the podcast, so I hope you're ready, Crystal. Are you ready?
I am.
All right. Number 1, what is your all-time favorite movie?
Oh, Beetlejuice? No, not Beetlejuice. It's probably Pulp Fiction.
All right. Excellent answer. Number 2, favorite flavor of ice cream?
Blue Moon with Fruity Pebbles as a topping. Shout out to Alex Scott for that one. I hope you end up watching this, but you inspired me for a lifetime.
Number 3, favorite Masters of the Universe character?
It's going to be Skeletor because he's so goofy.
I knew you were going to pick that.
What?
Number
What
4.
did you want from me?
Number 4. No explanation needed. Number 4, favorite Judas Priest song?
You already know it's Grinder.
Number 5, favorite Star Wars hero?
Finn.
Number 6. Favorite current series to DVR, stream, binge?
Well, right now we're binging Sopranos, so that's currently my favorite because we're going pretty hard on it. Like every night is like, want to watch more of this show?
Number 7, DC or Marvel?
Marvel.
Number 8, favorite member of Motley Crue?
Mick Mars.
Number 9, Freddy or Jason?
Freddy.
And number 10, our final question, your favorite childhood toy or toy line?
Crap, this one's a hard one. It's probably Barbie.
All right. Before we wrap this up and get out of here, where can people check out Wrestling Public Radio?
So, Wrestling Public Radio, the podcast, is available on all streaming platforms, wherever you prefer to listen to podcasts, whether it be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google, Pocket Casts. You could listen from anchor.fm. You can search for Wrestling Public Radio on there. And you can find me on Twitter at WPR Media, as well as Instagram and Facebook at Wrestling Public Radio. I'm always posting when new episodes go up. They go up every Monday. And I also add additional content, things that were talked about in each episode. I try to give a little bit of context surrounding the things that I'm talking about so that there's some visual representations as well.
Excellent. And remember, this show was streamed live on YouTube. When you join in live on YouTube, you can submit questions in the live chat. You just click on that little live chat below the video. As you can tell, you can submit questions. We'll answer them live on air during the podcast. The more questions, the better. And we try on every podcast to answer why wasn't Johnny Depp in this particular venture. But you can stream it from now until forever and replay on YouTube, or starting on the following Monday, which is in a few days. This will be available in an audio-only format on all podcast platforms. So Spotify, Apple Podcast app, Google Podcasts, wherever you like to listen to podcasts, it's available, just like Wrestling Public Radio. Crystal, thank you so much for being part of today's episode of the Collect and Destroy podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks everybody for tuning in. I really appreciate it.
Everyone stay safe out there, and we'll catch you for our next episode when we sit down with my good friend Ken Hoffman to talk all things Tool. Thank you, and good night.